turbulence as an opportunity to change the game. Thank you, Mr. Shivkumar. Though we have many questions for you, but I understand you're short of time and you have a flight to catch. So we'll skip the question answer round with Mr. Shivkumar and we will prepone the Momento presentation. May I request Mr. Sapan Shah to please come and present the Momento on behalf of IMA to Mr. Shivkumar. I would now like to introduce Dr. Shubhada Rao to you. Dr. Shubhada Rao is the President and Chief Economist at Yes Bank. She is responsible for the economic knowledge banking, providing macroeconomic research outlook at the bank. She is a member of Yes Bank's Assets and Liabilities Committee. Shubhada brings with her over 20 years of experience in academia and industry, wherein she has pioneered research design geared to facilitate business decisions. Prior to joining Yes Bank, Shubhada has worked with Kotak Institutional Equities as Chief Economist, with Bank of Baroda as Economist with Risk Management, and as Head Economic Advisory at CRISIL Advisory Services. She also served as Chief Economist with Times Bank. She began her career in banking with ICICI Bank in their Planning and Treasury Department after completing a PhD in economics from the University of Mumbai. Shubhada is an active member of the Economics Committee of Industry Associations and is currently Chairman of Economics Committee of Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. As a thought leader, she has made extensive presentations on Indian economy to state dignitaries and many OECD economies, consulates, among others. Her views are often sought on domestic and international electronic and print media like CNBC, NDTV Profit, BBC World, Bloomberg, and business dailies like Economic Times, Business Standard, Mint, Hindu, Business Line, Outlook, Business Today, Business Week, among others. May I now request Dr. Shubhada Rao to please address the gathering.
A very warm good afternoon to all the fellow Indorians. Indore is my hometown, my birthplace, so it's coming back home for me. And I'm very, very proud and privileged to be part of this event. And thank you for sending in the kind invitation. Abhishek, there is a bit of an occupational hazard here. Economists love to talk. So you will have to first tell me how many minutes do I have that I can share my thoughts with this fantastic audience. About a half an hour to 40 minutes? All right. Okay, that includes a Q&A? I need to be specific. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to save you guys from trouble because economists can go on for hours and hours together just looking in the crystal gaze, you know, and give forecasts and outlook, and you will say, hey, what are you doing? Give us some concrete solutions. So to save all of you from that, you know, long playing record, I thought let me just quickly specify my time and then try and share our thoughts on what's going on across the world. How does it impact India? More importantly, how does it impact the businesses and all of you, the future business leaders, in shaping and evolving strategies? How does one cope with trouble? My preceding speakers, both extremely erudite, flamboyant, stylish, were leaders. And they gave out their thinking on how does one lead when you are in a turbulent times. Being an economist, I'm going to change that thought process. I'm going to share with you how to understand the turbulent times, what are the lessons that we need to learn from those turbulent times, and how best not to repeat those mistakes, and build strategies around safeguarding our economic well-being. So quite clearly, an economist's role is clearly etched out on finding out what are the key drivers that drove this turbulence that we are currently in. Quite clearly, I think, the watershed would be perhaps the historians of future may write the economic history of global economy pre-Lehman and post-Lehman, because it's around the 2008 mid-September time that the world came to shattering reality, that all that we understood that the party of economic growth is never ending came to a rude shock that indeed there were breaks to this party. What happened? What happened around that time? There were very few and very important pertinent lessons, that of excesses. It was a period of excesses. First, the excesses of the financial sector, and second, followed by it, excesses of the government sector. And that actually culminated in what is going on currently, as we all know, is Eurozone crisis. I'm going to share what we make of it. Quite clearly, Lehman kind of an event, or Lehman moment was a manifestation of policies, as I said, of excesses, and perhaps too much of faith in market economics. When I say excesses, what happened? It was Indian or a US household continuously consuming on the basis of his or her borrowing capability. So there was a leveraged consumption. There was a leveraged consumption because interest rates were kept far too low for far too long. So there was no concept of risk amongst the households, amongst the borrowers. They always believe that interest rates are going to remain very low, and let me continue borrowing even to consume, because I know that interest rates are not likely to rise. And that's what I meant when I said that party was not going to end. They continue to invest in houses, in built houses and properties, in real estate, thinking that continuous rise in house prices will help them build their wealth. And of course, with this notional wealth effect and this leveraged consumption, what happened? Crude oil prices started rising just around 2006, 2007. Interest rates were forced to be raised by the Fed. And then that is the time the pinch started. The leveraged consumption began to get hurt badly. People who were not capable of borrowing were actually given money, and they could not repay their interest. They could not forget the principal. They could not even repay their interests. That started the bubble. The housing prices began to collapse because of oversupplies. So quite clearly, it was a problem of excesses. Combining that, you had, creation of exotic products. The bank, which actually created a risk by giving a loan, continued to create exotic features around that loan and sold that risk to some other financial entity, which in turn created further exotic features to that product and sold it to other entity. So there was no ownership of risk. So this ultra exotic created derivative products, as we call them, continued for many more levels until a time that you did not know that when the underlying borrower defaulted, who actually paid? So that was the confusion. And third, the most important lesson was ultimate and perhaps a misplaced faith by the regulators, by the supervisors on free market economics. Too big to fail was the mantra used by them. But obviously, this was not to be. A big size holding like a Lehman collapsed. And what happened? All the myths came shattering that nothing is too big to fail. You needed to clearly improvise on your regulatory and supervisory framework. You needed to tighten the kind of a framework of risk management, and that is what was the first lesson that we need to learn. Okay? Following the excesses of the financial sector and the turbulence thereafter in a globalized world, what did we see? We saw the Eurozone crisis suddenly erupt and emerge in a big way. What was this Eurozone crisis all about? Or I should not even use the past tense because it's still ongoing. What is this Eurozone crisis all about? It's the crisis essentially emanating from the government's excessive borrowing programs without putting in place strong sources of their own funding, okay? They were depending far too much on the market borrowings, and therefore once the confidence eroded, once the risk erupted for a country like Greece, where the excess leveraging or excess borrowing actually resulted in investors, the bondholders as we call them, you know, demanding far too much of yield or interest rate on a supposed risk-free government borrowing. That is the time the world took notice, and sat up and took notice that even governments can't be perceived or no longer can be called risk-free. Why was it? Because of excessive spending by the governments without putting in place on their revenue side strong, sustainable revenue model. So what did happen? Country after country continued to borrow more and more from the markets, and markets had, up to a point, had enough faith. But once they realized that this country is about to default on a repayment of a loan, that's the time the investors' faith was shattered, investor confidence was shattered, and the so-called risk-free government bonds, or the issue of government paper, say a 10-year or a 3-year maturity paper, which typically used to have an interest or an yield of 1 or 2%, actually shot up to about 20 to 30%, clearly saying that no more of risk can be handled by the investors, even if that risk is being given by the government. So quite clearly, what are the 3 lessons that we learn from the global crisis, starting off with Lehman and then the ongoing crisis from the Eurozone? Very clearly that you cannot continue to go on leveraging in an excessive form. You need to just about have a more mature mix of borrowing, of leveraging as it is technically called. Second, that you need to have very strong risk management practices. You cannot allow the financial entities or the stakeholders in the economy to govern on their own principles of market economics, because there's no such thing as too big to fail. The third and more important lesson on hindsight that we learn is that we need to save in good times to provide adequate buffers to be able to ride through the rough times. I think these are the three clear lessons that one learns from the global turmoil. Coming back to why am I so perturbed about what's happening across the globe? Why do I worry so much? What's happening across the seas in US or across the seas in Eurozone? Why do I, sitting here in Indore, need to understand all this? Because quite clearly, India is now living in a highly globalized world. India is very well integrated with the global economy. And what do I mean by saying integrated? A lot of our businesses, a lot of our foreign direct investment, both ways, in and out, okay, is actually thriving on global investors' interest, because they see India as one of the land of opportunities for growth. Emerging market, so to speak, has offered tremendous opportunities. With a size of a population of over 1.4 billion, obviously, for the world, it's the most important emerging market. What they may take, the global players may take about 5 or 6 years to break even. They may take half the time to break even by building volumes in their businesses. So quite clearly, Indian demographics provides a most tremendous opportunity for foreign businesses to grow.